At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in a quiet suburb of Ohio, a 75-year-old mother was told by her own son's wife that she no longer had the right to live in her own home. The kettle clicked off, but no one noticed. Cedar Ridge, Ohio held its breath in the late autumn light suburban silence, wrapped around trimmed lawns and motionless maple trees. Inside, the Lawson kitchen looked as ordinary as any other. A dish towel folded with military precision, sunlight crawling slowly across the counter, the faint hum of a refrigerator that had seen better years. Margaret Lawson Maggie, to those who still dared to call her by name, stood by the sink, her hands steady, her breath slow. For 35 years she had worked at City Hall, drafting reports, stamping forms, keeping everything in order. Precision was her armor. Even now, she found herself counting seconds between words, breaths between insults. Heather spoke first. She always did. "You cannot live here anymore, Margaret." The words were surgical, cold, clean, and final. Her son Kyle stood nearby, leaning against the doorway, phone in hand like a shield. His eyes flickered toward his mother for just a moment, then dropped to the floor. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. It was the silence of a verdict. Maggie blinked once, her face calm as still water. "And why is that?" Heather placed a glossy brochure on the table, her tone soft and rehearsed. "You forget things. You repeat stories. Sometimes you get attached to objects. We found a wonderful facility, Maple Grove. They have trained staff, trivia nights, memory care." "Memory care," Maggie echoed, the phrase tasting foreign in her mouth. Kyle sighed. "Mom, we just want what's best for you." "What's best for me," she said quietly. "Or what's easiest for you?" Heather's smile did not move. "We can help you pack tonight. They have everything you need." Maggie looked down at the brochure. A woman her age smiled from a staged photo, perfect hair, perfect cardigan, holding a puzzle piece in soft daylight. Behind her, the facility gleamed sterile and safe. She closed the brochure without a word. "I will be gone tomorrow." Heather's mouth parted. That quickly?" "Yes." Kyle finally looked up, startled by her calm. There was no tremor in her voice, no protest, no plea. Only stillness, the kind that meant something deeper had already shifted. When the conversation ended, Maggie returned to her small bedroom at the end of the hall. The second television they had given her sat in the corner, a smaller echo of the big one in the living room, a visual reminder that she belonged to the side, not the center. On her desk lay an old red ledger, the same kind she had used at City Hall. She opened it, and her handwriting, neat, slanted, deliberate, filled the page. July 25th. Commented on my cardigan. July 28th. Soy sauce too cheap. Advised to buy better. August 5th. Suggested I cannot manage my medication. August 28th. Decluttering my closet without consent. September 2nd. Left facility pamphlet on kitchen counter. September 5th. Attempted to throw away photo album. Called it early dementia. October 3rd. Called me baggage. The ink looked darker than usual. She closed the book, exhaled slowly, and reached for a small wooden box on her nightstand. Inside lay a white business card with raised navy letters. Tyler J. Reed, President, Reed Construction Company. Her nephew, her late brother's only son, the one who had stopped her in the grocery aisle weeks ago, concern etched into his face when he saw discount labels in her cart. "If you ever need me," he'd said, "call me. Any hour. I mean it." She ran her thumb over the embossed lettering, then opened her phone. The wallpaper glowed with an old photo, a lake at dusk, the same lake where her husband used to fish. Her fingers hesitated over the keypad, then she dialed. "Tyler," she said when he answered, "is the plan still possible?" His voice was calm, certain. "Already set. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, black sedan. Bring only what matters." "Thank you." She hung up, set the phone down, and looked around her room at the suitcases already packed before the conversation ever happened, at the memories lined up like soldiers awaiting orders. The Ring camera at the front door blinked blue. A car slowed outside. Someone stepped onto the porch. Too early for morning. Too quiet for coincidence. Maggie froze, her suitcase half-zipped, as the sound of tires stopped outside because whoever had come to the house that night was not supposed to arrive until morning. It had begun quietly, as most tragedies do. The day she moved in, Maggie thought it was temporary. Just until the knee heals, she told herself, looking at the guest room that smelled faintly of new paint and detergent. Kyle and Heather had been warm at first, too warm, in that rehearsed way people are when they want credit for kindness. The first week was full of casseroles, questions, and soft smiles. The second week was when the distance began to form. At the dinner table, Heather would ask, "So, Mom, how was your day?" But her eyes stayed on her phone. Kyle, buried behind the Cedar Ridge Gazette, would mutter, "Same as yesterday, right?" and chuckle at his own joke. When Maggie began to tell a story about a neighbor named Mrs. Harper, Heather interrupted mid-sentence. "Oh, the one you mentioned yesterday?" Laughter. The sound of forks. The sound of invisibility. It was a small, everyday erosion, nothing dramatic enough for outsiders to notice. But inside, she could feel it, the slow reduction of her identity from person to presence. When she offered to wash the dishes, Heather would smile too sweetly. "Oh, please, Margaret, don't worry about it. You just sit." When she tried to cook dinner once, Heather had swooped in again. "We love your cooking, but younger taste buds are a little different. I'll take care of it." That phrase, "I'll take care of it," was everywhere. It meant, don't touch. It meant, you're in the way. Soon, even the living room became foreign territory. Maggie's small television, your personal TV, Heather had called it, was placed in the corner of her room, beside the window that looked out at the neighbor's fence. The big television, the one with surround sound and subscriptions, was now their domain. When she walked through the living room, Kyle's thumb would tighten around the remote. "Mom, we're watching this right now." "I was just passing through," she'd answer softly, though she wasn't. The ledger began then. At first, it was simply a way to keep her mind sharp. Years at City Hall had taught her the comfort of order. Black ink for dates, blue ink for reflections, red for moments that hurt more than they should. July 15th. Repeated story about Mrs. Harper. Corrected by Heather. July 16th. Denied offer to wash dishes. July 17th. Television restricted. She didn't write to complain. She wrote to remember to make sure she wasn't losing herself in someone else's version of events. Because when no one says your name anymore, you start wondering if you exist only out of habit. Nights were the hardest. From her small bed, Maggie could hear muffled laughter from the living room, two people sharing the life she helped build, closing the door on the woman who gave them both a roof. She turned toward the moonlight sliding across her desk, eyes falling on the open page of her ledger. "What am I here?" she whispered to the dark. "A mother? Or a tenant without rent?" The words weren't angry, just tired. The next morning, Heather commented on Maggie's outfit, an old floral blouse, pressed clean but faded at the shoulders. "Do you ever buy new clothes, Margaret? It might help you feel fresh, you know. Presentation matters, especially for Kyle's reputation." It was said with a smile, but the smile never reached her eyes. Maggie touched the fabric gently. "It's comfortable," she said. "Well," Heather added, "people might think we're not taking care of you properly. I just want what's best for everyone." There it was again, what's best. The sentence that made cruelty sound like compassion. That evening she overheard them whispering near the sink. "Utilities are up again," Heather said. "Yeah," Kyle replied. "Mom's laundry every day probably doesn't help." Maggie had been careful to run the washer only once a week. Still, she made a note in her ledger. July 23rd. Overheard conversation about cost of my presence. Every word in that book was quiet ammunition. She didn't know yet that one day she would use it. By August, Heather's tone had sharpened. "Older people forget things. It's normal," she'd say, watching Maggie misplace her glasses for a moment. "But we have to keep an eye out, just in case." It was subtle. Too subtle for outsiders, but each sentence carried a seed of accusation. Dementia, forgetfulness, weakness, it was all the same verdict, spoken in slow motion. One afternoon, Maggie tried to set the table before dinner. Heather stopped her mid-motion. "Oh, Margaret, you do not have to. I just cleaned that surface." Maggie smiled and stepped back, but when she turned away, Heather picked up the plates Maggie had just set down and rewashed them, one by one. She did not speak. She simply took her seat at dinner and wrote later. August 3rd. Corrected for setting clean plates. That night, Maggie realized something chilling. Her silence made it easier for them. Her calmness once, her strength had become her camouflage. She stared out the window, where porch lights blinked on across the neighborhood like small confessions. It was there, in that dim reflection, that she first whispered the thought she hadn't dared to say aloud. They are trying to erase me, gently. Outside, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically, spraying water over the yard she once paid to landscape. The rhythm was steady, mechanical, endless. Maggie opened her ledger again. The last line of the day read simply, August 5th. Becoming invisible is not sudden, it is a process. She underlined it twice. And yet, even as the ink dried, she did not know that her quiet record-keeping would soon become the single most powerful weapon she had, one that would expose every secret her son and his wife thought they had safely buried. Because somewhere, deep inside that ordinary Ohio home, a quiet war had already begun, and Margaret Lawson had just started writing its evidence. The shift happened so gradually that an outsider might have missed it, but Maggie noticed every detail, every pause, every sigh that carried judgment wrapped in politeness. It began with Heather's suggestions. "You should really let me handle your medication, Margaret," she said one morning, opening the pill organizer like a detective inspecting evidence. "Older folks sometimes forget, and I'd feel terrible if you took something twice." "I have not missed a dose in 30 years, Maggie replied softly. Heather smiled as if she had not heard her. "I will keep it here in the kitchen just in case." The pill box never returned to Maggie's room. She wrote it down that night. August 10th. Medication relocated without consent, claimed it is for safety. It was not just the pills, it was the groceries too. Maggie once came home with a bag of sale items. Eggs, a small carton of milk, soy sauce marked half off. Heather held the bottle up to the light. "Discount brand, no wonder it tastes thin." Kyle laughed faintly but did not defend her. "You do not need to buy the cheapest things, Margaret," Heather continued. "We can afford decent food." Maggie folded her hands in her lap. "I was only trying to help." "Well," Heather said, "we are all trying to help in our own ways." Later that night, Maggie heard them whispering behind their bedroom door. "She worries too much about money," Heather said. "It is almost like she grew up poor." "She did not," Kyle answered. "But she acts like it now." Maggie's pen pressed hard against the page as she wrote, August 12th, overheard conversation about my poverty. She smiled bitterly. If only they knew. For decades, Maggie had been the quiet backbone of their lives. She had helped with the down payment on this very house, 300,000 yens worth of US dollars in old savings. She had paid off Kyle's car loan when his sales job faltered. During Heather's maternity leave, she covered their mortgage for 2 months. Not once had she mentioned it. She did not want gratitude. She wanted peace. But peace, she now realized, was a luxury you could only afford when people respected you. At dinner, Heather spoke about friends from work, home renovations, and vacation plans. Kyle laughed and nodded, never once asking his mother how her day had been. When Maggie tried to join the conversation, Heather turned politely. "That is nice, Margaret," she said, "but we are talking about something else right now." Maggie stopped speaking altogether. The only sounds at the table were the scrape of forks and the hum of the refrigerator. Later, as Heather washed dishes, she looked at Maggie's reflection in the window. "You know, it is normal for seniors to repeat things," she said casually. "My aunt had early dementia, sweet lady. One day she poured salt into her tea." Maggie smiled faintly. Perhaps she just wanted more flavor. Heather did not laugh. When Maggie went to her room that night, she felt something inside her shift. It was not anger, not yet. It was awareness. A deep, cold understanding that love had turned conditional. She opened her ledger again. August 15th. Compared me to a dementia patient. Noted tone, casual, dismissive. Then beneath it, in smaller letters, "They are beginning to rewrite my story." Outside, cicadas screamed through the Ohio summer, relentless and alive. The noise was almost comforting proof that something out there still existed loudly. Maggie sat by her window, watching the porch light flicker. She wondered how long people could pretend kindness before it curdled into contempt. A week later, Heather entered Maggie's room without knocking. "This space could use some decluttering," she said, scanning the bookshelf lined with photo albums and old City Hall binders. "You hold on to so much." "These are my records," Maggie replied quietly. "They help me remember." Heather smiled again. "That is exactly what worries me. Sometimes attachment to old things means you are stuck." She pulled open the closet. "This dress?" she asked, holding up a gray suit. "You have not worn this in years." "That is from my retirement dinner," Maggie said quickly. "Please do not touch it." But Heather was already folding it into a garbage bag. "Less clutter, less stress," she chirped. Maggie's voice cracked for the first time. "Stop." Heather froze. Slowly she turned around. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "you are getting worked up. You really should not. It is not good for your blood pressure." Maggie's hands trembled not with weakness, but with something sharper, something that had been waiting months to surface. That night, her ledger page was longer than ever before. August 28th. Personal items removed without consent. Claimed to be decluttering. Suggested I am emotionally unstable. Possible attempt to discredit. Then, at the very bottom, "I will not forget this." She knew what they were building. A narrative, one that would end with her being too fragile or mentally declining. And once that label stuck, her words would mean nothing. So she wrote everything. Every quote, every date, every tone. Her handwriting remained calm, elegant, deadly. One evening, while setting down her tea, she caught her reflection again, the same calm face, the same eyes that had once comforted a child through fevers, breakups, and failures. Now those same eyes saw something new. Strategy. She whispered to the mirror, "They think I am fading, but I am recording." It was not a threat. It was a promise. Outside, the streetlights blinked on one by one as the world tucked itself into bed. Inside, Maggie turned the page of her ledger, dipped her pen in ink, and wrote 5 new words that would change everything. Prepare for what comes next. Because before the month was over, Heather would make one fatal mistake, the kind that would turn Margaret Lawson's quiet ledger into a weapon powerful enough to destroy her son's entire life. It was early September. The air had cooled, and the first orange leaves gathered against the curb outside Juniper Lane. Inside, the Lawson household moved as if nothing had changed. Morning coffee brewing, Kyle's briefcase by the door, Heather humming along with the radio while sorting laundry. But beneath the surface, something poisonous had already taken root. Maggie sat at the kitchen table, her old ledger open, pen resting between her fingers. She no longer wrote just for memory, she wrote for evidence. Heather came in with a laundry basket, folded Kyle's shirts neatly, and then almost too casually said it. "Margaret, you've been wearing the same clothes again, haven't you?" Maggie looked up, calm as always. "These are clean." "I know," Heather replied, folding another shirt, her tone syrupy sweet. "But you know how people talk. Kyle's coworkers might think we're neglecting you. We have reputations to maintain." Reputation. There it was, the word that stripped away the mask. It was not about care or love or safety. It was about image. Maggie closed her ledger slowly. "Do I embarrass you, Heather?" Heather laughed, too high-pitched. "No, of course not. It's just, older people sometimes don't notice how they come across. It's our job to keep things presentable." Our job. Presentable. Each syllable fell like a verdict. That night Maggie sat alone by her window and watched the neighbor's sprinklers mist across the lawn. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence like static. She thought about the word our, how it once meant family, unity, belonging. Now it meant control. She turned to her ledger and began a new entry, her handwriting sharper than usual. September 3rd, appearance criticized, labeled as reflection of their reputation. Implication, I am burden, not family. Her eyes fell on the pages she had already filled, a pattern emerging like a map of quiet cruelty. And then, 2 nights later, it happened again. Heather opened the refrigerator, her manicured hand hovering over a bottle of soy sauce. "Is this the same one you bought last time?" "Yes," Maggie said. Heather twisted the cap, tasted a drop on her finger, and smiled faintly. "I thought so. It's the discount one again. A bit thin, don't you think?" Kyle chuckled, half embarrassed. "Come on, Heather." "What?" she replied, feigning innocence. "We're just talking about taste." Heather turned back toward Maggie. "You don't have to scrimp anymore. You've got us." That one hurt more than she expected. The implication was clear. You are poor. You are dependent. We are your providers. Maggie said nothing. But in her mind, a different ledger began forming, not in ink, but in memory. Because Heather was wrong, dead wrong. Maggie was not poor. She was not dependent. She was, in fact, the quiet foundation beneath everything Heather and Kyle called theirs. The down payment for this very home, $70,000, Maggie's savings. The new SUV in their garage loan covered by Maggie when Kyle's bonus fell short. Heather's maternity leave, rent, food, utilities quietly paid from Maggie's checking account. And she had proof of every cent. For years, she had slipped money through transfers labeled holiday bonuses or loan forgiveness. Not because she wanted power, but because she wanted her son to feel proud. Because she believed that real love gives without asking anything in return. But now that love had turned invisible and worse, distorted. Heather had mistaken humility for weakness. Kyle had mistaken silence for ignorance. And both of them were about to learn the most painful truth of all, that the woman they dismissed as baggage was the one holding up their entire world. Maggie opened her file drawer and took out the folder she hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies of bank statements, transfer slips, notarized documents. The ink was faded, but the numbers still gleamed like small, undeniable ghosts. $70,000 for down payment, $20,000 for Kyle's car, $10,000 for temporary medical leave, $8,000 in holiday bonuses. She had done it out of love, but love, she realized now, should never require silence. The next morning, Heather made another offhand remark while glancing at Maggie's pills on the counter. "You really should not keep track of your own medication, Margaret. It is too much responsibility at your age." Maggie's eyes flicked up, cold and sharp. "At my age, I was managing payroll for an entire city department. I think I can handle 2 tablets a day." Heather blinked. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Maggie interrupted softly. "You always do." Heather opened her mouth to respond, but for once, no words came. Maggie turned back to her tea, hands steady as ever. That night she wrote, September 8th, pattern confirmed. Repetition of manipulation through care language, intention, undermine credibility, counteraction, prepare full documentation. Then, beneath that, one last line. When they think I am weak, I am safest. Her heart beat faster as she looked over her records. 35 years of bureaucratic discipline, precision, and patience, all distilled into one unstoppable weapon, truth. For the first time in months, she smiled. A quiet, tired smile, but one carrying the weight of awakening. She wasn't done, not even close. Because while Heather and Kyle spent their nights whispering about facilities, Maggie had already begun drafting a different kind of exit plan, one that involved lawyers, not nurses, documents, not goodbyes. The old Maggie, the obedient Maggie, was gone. What remained was a strategist. And when the truth finally surfaced, Heather and Kyle would discover that the woman they tried to erase hadn't just been keeping notes, she'd been building a case. It was a Wednesday morning, cold and damp, the kind of day when the sky looks bruised before it rains. Kyle had already left for work. Heather, in her satin robe and tidy ponytail, wandered into Margaret's room without knocking again. "Good morning, Margaret," she said lightly, scanning the room as if she were conducting an inspection rather than offering a greeting. "You sleep all right?" Maggie looked up from her desk, where her ledger lay half open. "Fine, thank you." Heather's eyes darted across the room to the neatly folded clothes, the organized drawers, the stack of old photo albums beside the lamp. Her gaze stopped on the albums. "These," she said, pointing. "You still keep all of these old pictures?" "They are my memories," Maggie replied. Heather smiled the way people do when they think they're speaking to a child. Yes, but they are just things, right? Holding on too tightly to the past can be unhealthy. She reached for the top album, the one from Maggie's 35 years at City Hall, and flipped it open without asking. Inside were photographs of Maggie's late husband, her co-workers, and Kyle as a young boy holding his first Little League trophy. Heather paused on a picture of Kyle at age 10, grinning beside his mother. "You used to have such energy back then," she said softly. "But sometimes, when people age, their minds, lose their sharpness." Maggie's pen stopped mid-sentence. "I beg your pardon?" Heather shut the album and placed it back, too close to the edge of the table. "You just seem confused lately. Forgetful." She smiled again. "We only worry because we love you." That phrase, "we only worry because we love you," felt like a knife wrapped in ribbon. Margaret Lawson had spent her entire career detecting dishonesty in carefully written forms and soft-spoken words. She knew when a statement was designed not to inform but to manipulate. And this was an accusation disguised as affection. When Heather left the room, Maggie exhaled through her nose. Calm, precise, controlled. She picked up her pen and wrote, September 15th, accused of memory decline. Motive, to establish incompetence narrative. Observed, forced smile, avoidance of eye contact. Conclusion, premeditated. Then, she turned the page and drew a line beneath the day's entry. Countermeasure, collect corroborating evidence. The following morning, Maggie waited until Heather left for her Pilates class before opening her file drawer. She took out not just her financial records, but also copies of medical reports, bank letters, tax documents, anything that could prove her mental and physical competence. She photographed each page with her phone and stored them on a hidden flash drive labeled Recipes. Every timestamp, every number, every signature proof of clarity. When Heather returned home, she found Maggie quietly reading in the living room. "Margaret," she said, "did you move your medication again?" "No," Maggie said without looking up. "Strange," Heather replied. "It was not on the counter." "Then perhaps," Maggie said evenly, "you misplaced it." Heather blinked, caught off guard by the tone. "Excuse me?" "I said," Maggie repeated, "perhaps you misplaced it." For the first time, Heather had no ready response. She forced a smile and walked away. That night, Maggie added another note. September 16th, medication tampered with or relocated. Purpose, reinforced dementia narrative, countered verbally. Then, at the bottom, in steady cursive, she underestimates me. Over the next week, Heather's campaign grew more deliberate. She began speaking to Kyle in careful whispers whenever Maggie was nearby. The phrases were faint but unmistakable. Mom seemed confused again today. I am not sure she remembered to lock the door. She repeated herself at dinner. Kyle's responses were short, uncertain. "She has been through a lot, Heather." But Heather pressed on. "I am only thinking of her safety, and ours." Maggie heard every word and wrote down each one, noting the date and exact time. By the end of the week, her ledger had filled 23 new lines. She read through them like an attorney reviewing testimony. The pattern was undeniable. A systematic attempt to build a record of decline. And for what? To push her out, to seize control of her finances? She did not know yet, but she would. That Friday, Heather struck again, this time in front of Kyle. They were seated at the dinner table. Maggie had cooked a simple meal, beef stew, just as she used to make for her husband. The aroma filled the kitchen with warmth, but Heather wrinkled her nose. "Traditional cooking," she said politely, "is nice once in a while, but it's a bit heavy, don't you think? Not really suited for younger tastes." Kyle chuckled awkwardly. "It's fine, Heather." "No, I mean it," Heather continued. "Older recipes are so brown." Maggie looked down at her plate. "Brown," she repeated. Heather smiled thinly. "Yes, just a lot of gravy, a lot of starch. You know how it is." That night in her room, Maggie wrote, September 19th, meal criticized as too brown. Intent, reinforce generational irrelevance. Reaction, none. Internal state, detached calm. She paused, then added a new section title across the page in bold, deliberate letters. Stage 2, Counteraction. Below it she wrote, 1. Secure all personal records. 2. Contact attorney pending. 3. Observe husband-wife dynamic. Identify weaknesses. The last point she underlined twice. Because the more she watched, the more she saw the cracks between Kyle and Heather widening. Heather controlled, corrected, commanded. Kyle obeyed, apologized, withdrew. It was the same pattern, only inverted. He too was quietly vanishing under the weight of someone else's certainty. And Margaret Lawson understood now. She was not just fighting for her dignity. She was fighting for her son's soul. That night, she opened her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she had saved weeks ago, Tyler Reed. Her thumb hovered over it, trembling slightly. She was not ready to call. Not yet. But soon. She placed the phone beside her pillow, turned off the light, and whispered to the darkness. They want to build a story about me. A pause. I will build one about them. The rain started outside, soft, steady, unending. And by the time the rain stopped, Heather's next kind gesture would cross a legal line. She could never take back a mistake that would finally give Maggie the proof she had been waiting for. The storm had cleared overnight. The air was wet and heavy, and sunlight pressed through the blinds in narrow, prison-like lines. Margaret woke before dawn, as she always did. Habit. Decades of rising early to open the records office had trained her body to obey order even when her heart no longer did. By 6 o'clock she was dressed, ledger updated, tea steeped. The house was silent. Too silent. When she stepped into the hallway, the kitchen lights were already on. Heather stood by the counter, dressed for work though it was Saturday, her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. "Good morning," Margaret said softly. Heather turned. "Oh, you're up early." Her smile was too bright. The kind of smile people wear when they are hiding something. On the counter sat Margaret's pillbox. The compartments had been rearranged. Margaret approached slowly. "You've been adjusting my medication again?" Heather lifted the folder. "Actually, I spoke with someone at Cedar Creek Wellness Center yesterday. They do cognitive screenings and daily care supervision. It's not a facility, it's more like assisted living." Maggie's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "You spoke with them about me?" Heather's tone softened, but her eyes did not. "We just wanted information. You've been so forgetful lately." She flipped open the folder. Inside were intake forms already filled out. Name, Margaret Lawson. Date of birth, the 9th of October, 1950. Primary reason for assessment, cognitive decline, early stage dementia suspected. Margaret's blood ran cold. Her handwriting wasn't there, but her signature was. "Where did you get this?" Heather blinked innocently. "You signed it yesterday. You do not remember?" Maggie's mind raced. Yesterday, Heather had brought her tea after dinner. She had been unusually friendly, almost tender. Maggie had signed a form, then something Heather said was for the homeowner's insurance renewal. It was not insurance, it was this. Her penmanship stared back at her from the page, proof of her own naivete. Heather closed the folder with a satisfied sigh. "You see, we just want you safe. Kyle agrees this is best." For the first time in months, Maggie's mask cracked. "You forged my consent." Heather tilted her head. "You're confused, Margaret, that's why we're doing this." That word again, confused. A weapon dressed as concern. Maggie felt her heartbeat slow, her mind sharpen. She had worked with people like this her whole life, officials who hid cruelty behind procedure. She knew how to handle them. "You're right," she said quietly. "I may be confused." Heather blinked, surprised by the agreement. "I should sit down and review these documents again, just to make sure I remember everything." "Of course," Heather said, relieved. "I'll bring you tea." When Heather left the room, Maggie took out her phone. She turned on the recorder. Then, calmly, deliberately, she flipped through each page, reading aloud. Cedar Creek Wellness Center. Cognitive screening. Initiated by Heather Lawson. No prior medical authorization. Signature obtained under false pretense. Her voice did not shake. It sounded clinical, almost detached, the tone of a woman documenting an administrative fraud. When Heather returned with tea, Maggie smiled faintly. "Thank you, dear." Heather sat down across from her. "I know this is hard, Margaret, but you'll thank us later. It's what families do." Maggie set down her cup, folded her hands, and looked her daughter-in-law square in the eye. "Families protect each other," she said, "not frame each other." Heather's smile faltered. "Excuse me?" Maggie leaned forward slightly. "I worked in government for 35 years. Do you know what happens when someone signs a medical authorization under false pretenses?" Heather hesitated. I don't know what you mean." Maggie's tone never rose. "It's called fraudulent representation of consent, a Class C felony in the state of Ohio." Heather's face drained of color. Maggie continued, her voice calm, almost soothing. "I have already recorded this conversation. Your voice, your admissions, this folder, all of it. You've given me what lawyers call prima facie evidence." Heather's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You may leave now," Maggie said gently, "before I forget what forgiveness feels like." Heather stumbled backward, clutching the folder. You're twisting this, Margaret. I was just trying to help." Maggie smiled, the way one smiles at a child learning consequences. "Of course you were." Heather turned and fled down the hall, the front door slammed. The house fell silent again. Maggie exhaled slowly, steadying her hands. Then she took her phone, stopped the recording, and labeled the file, Evidence A. Later that afternoon, Kyle came home early. He looked tense, eyes darting from his mother's calm face to the empty space where his wife's purse usually hung. "Mom, what happened here?" Maggie looked up from her ledger. "Your wife forged my signature on a medical consent form. I advised her to consult legal counsel." Kyle's mouth opened. She wouldn't." "She did," Maggie said. "And I have proof." Kyle sank into the chair across from her. For the first time in a long while, he looked like a boy again, lost, ashamed, afraid. "Mom," he whispered, "I did not know she did that." "I believe you," she said softly. "But you knew what she was capable of. You chose to stay quiet." Tears welled in his eyes. He nodded slowly. Maggie closed her ledger. "Kyle, I love you. But from now on, silence is no longer an option for either of us." She stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the neighborhood where everything appeared so ordinary, where the lawns were trimmed, the mailboxes polished, and behind each curtain, someone pretended to be happy. In the reflection of the glass, she saw herself small, steady, unbreakable. Then she whispered a line that would soon become her private motto. "I have lived my life serving systems. Now I am one." That night, she emailed the recording and scanned documents to a private attorney, a former colleague who owed her more than one favor. The subject line read simply, "Preliminary evidence, Lawson case." For the first time in months, she slept soundly. Because she knew that in the morning, the balance of power in that house would shift forever. But when morning came, it was not the attorney who appeared at her door. It was a familiar black sedan, arriving 24 hours earlier than planned, with someone inside who was not Tyler Reed. It was Sunday morning, 8:15. The house was still, except for the sound of rain dripping from the gutters. Maggie had just finished writing a new ledger entry when she heard the sound slow tires over wet asphalt, a low engine hum, then a door closing. She looked through the lace curtain. The car was sleek, black, polished, just as Tyler had promised, but something about it felt off, too new, too official. When the driver stepped out, the unease hardened into certainty. He wasn't Tyler, he was a stranger. Tall, mid-30s, clean-cut, wearing a gray suit and holding a clipboard. No umbrella, no hesitation. He walked with the mechanical calm of someone following instructions. The doorbell rang twice. Maggie opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" "Good morning, Mrs. Lawson," the man said, smiling with that sterile politeness she recognized from every bureaucrat she'd ever worked with. "I'm from Cedar Creek Wellness. We're here for your scheduled intake." Maggie's blood ran cold. "Scheduled by whom?" He looked down at his clipboard. "Your daughter-in-law, Mrs. Heather Lawson. Everything's been arranged, transportation, initial assessment, the room." "There has been a mistake," Maggie said flatly. "You're not taking me anywhere." The man's smile didn't falter. I understand transitions can be difficult, Mrs. Lawson. Why don't you grab your bag and we'll— The click of the door lock cut him off. Maggie shut it firmly, her hands shaking not from fear but from fury. She stepped back, drew a breath, and dialed a number she had memorized for months but never called until now. "Tyler?" His voice answered instantly. "Aunt Maggie, you all right?" "They sent someone," she said quietly. "From the facility, early, not you." There was a pause, the sound of rustling papers, then urgency in his tone. "Do not open the door again. I'm 30 minutes away. Keep the line open." "I'm fine," she said calmly. "But they won't be." She hung up, switched her phone to record again, and pressed it against the front window pane. Outside, the man knocked once more. "Mrs. Lawson, we're only here to help." Maggie didn't answer. Instead, she raised her phone and captured everything: his voice, his vehicle, the name of the company printed on the van door, Cedar Creek Wellness Transport Division. Every frame was evidence, every second was documentation. Minutes later, the sound of another car approached fast, confident, then brakes. The second black sedan stopped behind the first. Tyler Reed stepped out, rain still streaking across his shoulders. He was taller than she remembered, with a presence that filled the quiet suburban street like a siren no one else could hear. "Sir, this is private property," the driver said, stepping forward. Tyler flashed a card from his jacket pocket. "And I'm her legal family representative. Who authorized this transport order?" The driver hesitated. "Mrs. Heather Lawson." "Authorization from a non-medical relative for involuntary evaluation?" Tyler's voice was calm but edged with iron. "Do you know that's a federal offense under elder protection law?" The man blinked. "We were told." "You were told wrong," Tyler cut in. "You're leaving now, and if you so much as touch that doorbell again, I'll make sure your company loses its operating license before lunch." The driver swallowed, stepped back, and returned to his car. A moment later, the sedan rolled away, its taillights shrinking into the gray distance. Tyler turned toward the house. For a moment he simply looked at her standing behind the door, calm but trembling. Then he smiled. "You all right, Aunt Maggie?" She unlocked the door. "I am now." He stepped inside, the scent of rain following him. "You were right to call me. What happened?" "They tried to have me taken," she said, "with falsified papers." Tyler's jaw tightened. "You have the documents?" "In my desk. And recordings." "Good," he said. "Because this isn't just about them anymore. It's criminal." Maggie nodded slowly. "Then it's time I stop being polite." Tyler opened his briefcase and spread out papers on the kitchen table. Bank records, trust documents, property titles, all copies she had sent weeks ago. "Your father, my grandfather, transferred ownership of this land to you in 1979, he said. "That means the house legally sits on your estate. They don't own it." Maggie blinked. "They don't?" "No," Tyler said. "They've been living rent-free on your property." For a moment, Maggie couldn't speak. Decades of guilt and restraint melted into clarity. "All those years," she whispered. "I thought I was depending on them." Tyler smiled gently. "It's the other way around, Aunt Maggie. They've been depending on you." She closed her eyes, a tremor passing through her chest. Not pain, not grief, but relief. At 75, she was finally seeing the truth written in ink and law. Tyler looked at her ledger. "You've been keeping records?" "For months," she said. "Every word, every insult, every fabricated story about my health." He skimmed a few pages, impressed. "You could take this straight to court. Honestly, this is cleaner than half the police reports I've seen." Maggie's lips curved into a thin smile. Old habits die hard. Just then, the sound of a car engine returned Heather's white SUV pulling into the driveway. Maggie didn't move. Tyler looked toward the window, his expression calm but cold. "Would you like me to handle this?" he asked. Maggie shook her head. "No. I will." Heather stepped inside moments later, shaking the rain from her coat. When she saw Tyler, her expression froze. "What are you doing here?" Tyler's voice was steady. "Cleaning up the mess you made." Heather's eyes darted to Maggie. "You called him?" Maggie's tone was quiet, controlled. "I did. You should not have sent that car." Heather laughed nervously. "What car?" Oh, that was just a misunderstanding. I recorded it, Maggie said. Every word, including your name on the order. Heather's smile vanished. You wouldn't. I would, Maggie said simply. And I already have. The silence that followed was thick, almost metallic. Heather turned pale, her voice small. Margaret, please, you're twisting this. We just wanted… Control, Maggie finished. You wanted control, and you lost it. Tyler glanced at his watch. We should leave soon. My attorney's waiting downtown. Heather stepped forward, desperate. Leave? What do you mean leave? Maggie looked at her, her expression calm and almost kind. I'm going home. Heather frowned. This is your home. No, Maggie said softly, lifting her suitcase handle. This was my mistake. She walked toward the door, Tyler at her side. Heather followed, voice breaking. Where will you go? Maggie turned back once, her eyes steady. Somewhere I don't have to ask permission to exist. And with that, she stepped out into the gray morning, the rain washing against the driveway like a curtain closing on the first act of a reckoning long overdue. But as Tyler loaded her suitcase into the car, Maggie's phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number flashing across the screen, and the voice on the other end said something that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Lawson, this is Detective Alvarez. We need to talk about a financial complaint filed in your name this morning by your son. Rain misted against the windshield as the black sedan idled in the driveway. Maggie sat motionless, the phone pressed against her ear, her reflection faint in the glass-calm face, trembling eyes. Mrs. Lawson, the detective repeated, your son Kyle Lawson submitted a financial complaint this morning, alleging irregular withdrawals and mismanagement of joint family funds. He claims you may be unfit to manage your own estate. For a moment, the only sound was the rhythmic thud of rain on metal. Unfit. The word hung in the air like a verdict. I see, Maggie said evenly. Did he provide evidence? Yes, the detective replied. He submitted copies of account transfers made to an entity under your name, Lawson Family Trust, dated 2 years ago. Maggie's lips pressed into a thin line. That trust was mine. Established in 2019, every dollar came from my savings. Then you'll have no issue providing documentation? None, she said. But detective, please make sure my son understands something. What's that, ma'am? That when you accuse a former city records administrator of financial misconduct, she said, voice steady as steel, you'd better have better paperwork than hers. She ended the call. Tyler, sitting beside her, turned the ignition key halfway. Trouble? Kyle filed a complaint, Maggie said quietly. Fraud, of all things. Tyler let out a low whistle. He's desperate. Desperation makes people dangerous, Maggie murmured, especially cowards. They pulled away from Juniper Lane. The neighborhood slipped past the mailboxes, the manicured lawns, the life she had built for everyone but herself. The rain blurred everything into gray watercolor. Inside the car, Tyler broke the silence. Do you have the trust documents with you? In the briefcase, she said. Copies, originals, notarizations. I was ready for this months ago. Good, Tyler said, because if he's claiming mental unfitness, it's about to turn into a competency hearing. Maggie gave a short laugh, dry and bitter. Ironic, isn't it? The same people who called me too sharp to argue with now want me declared too confused to speak. Tyler glanced at her. You sure you want to go through with this, Aunt Maggie? This isn't just family drama anymore. Once we move this into court, it's public. She looked out the window. Good. Let it be public. I've lived my life quietly. Maybe silence was my mistake. By 10 o'clock, they reached downtown Columbus. The rain had thinned into a mist. Tyler parked outside a modest 2-story law office with gold lettering on the glass, Redding, Hayes & Associates Family Law and Estate Protection. Inside, the air smelled faintly of old coffee and printer ink. A tall woman in her 40s greeted them with a calm professionalism that made Maggie instantly trust her. Mrs. Lawson, she said, shaking her hand. I'm attorney Dana Hayes. Tyler briefed me. I've already seen the recording, the falsified documents, and your ledger. Maggie nodded. Then you know everything. I know enough, Hayes said, and it's strong. Your records are meticulous. I can already tell this ledger of yours could bury them in discovery. She slid a folder across the table. We'll start by filing a counter-complaint. Elder coercion, document forgery, attempted unlawful transfer of guardianship. Every single action Heather took can be tied to intent. And Kyle? Maggie asked quietly. Hayes sighed. He'll be listed as a secondary respondent. His involvement seems mostly passive, but his name's on the complaint. Maggie's hands tightened around her teacup. He knew, she whispered. He didn't stop her. Sometimes silence is complicity, Hayes said softly. But the law doesn't punish guilt by disappointment. It punishes action. Maggie nodded, eyes fixed on the window. Outside, the city pulsed with movement umbrellas, traffic lights, people rushing to jobs that felt urgent in the moment and meaningless in hindsight. She realized something with startling clarity. For decades, she had lived to make life easier for others, and in doing so, had made herself invisible. Now the very people she had built comfort for were trying to erase her existence entirely. Not today. Hayes stood, gathering the papers. I'll handle the filing within the hour. Once this is in motion, they can't touch your assets or reputation without going through me. Maggie met her eyes. And after that? Hayes smiled faintly. Then we remind them who really owns that house. 2 hours later, as they left the office, Tyler's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. It's Kyle. Answer it, Maggie said. Tuller hit speaker. Kyle's voice came through, shaky and defensive. Tyler, we need to talk. Mom's losing it. Heather said she's making threats. Maggie interrupted, her voice cutting through like a scalpel. The only threat in this family, Kyle, is the truth. There was silence on the other end. Mom? He stammered. You talked to a lawyer? Yes, she said. She's quite capable. You'll meet her soon. Mom, this isn't what you think. Heather just... Stop, Maggie said. Heather's lies don't need your voice. She's had enough practice telling them. Kyle's breathing grew uneven. You can't do this to us. I already have, she replied. And for the first time in my life, I'm doing something for me. The line went dead. Tyler exhaled. That was brutal. Maggie turned her gaze to the rain-blurred horizon. Mercy, she said quietly, has its limits, and mine just expired. They drove on in silence, the highway stretching ahead like a clean, cold slate. Yet even as freedom loomed on the horizon, something gnawed at Maggie's calm, a faint, uneasy thought that this wasn't over. Because Heather was not the kind of woman who surrendered. She was the kind who retaliated. And somewhere, deep inside the house they had just left behind, Heather Lawson was already writing her own version of the story, one that would twist the truth so tightly, even the law might not recognize it. As night fell, a new email arrived in Maggie's inbox subject line. Urgent, Adult Protective Services Inquiry, allegation of financial exploitation. And below it, a single sentence that made her hands go cold. A report has been filed against you, Mrs. Lawson, by your daughter-in-law. Maggie stared at the glowing screen, the words cutting through the dim light of her nephew's guest room. A report has been filed against you, Mrs. Lawson, by your daughter-in-law. The sender was real. The state seal sat neatly in the corner. Ohio Department of Adult Protective Services. The timestamp read, 6:42 in the evening. Tyler stepped into the room holding 2 mugs of tea. He froze when he saw her face. What is it? She turned the laptop toward him. He read the message once, then again, his jaw tightening. She filed an Adult Protective Services report? That's bold. Maggie's voice was steady. She accused me of financial exploitation. Of who? She wrote, elderly spouse and family dependents. She's implying I stole from them. For the first time in days, Maggie laughed low, disbelieving, bitter. The woman who tried to have me institutionalized now claims that I exploited her. Tyler rubbed his forehead. That's a serious accusation. Adult Protective Services can freeze accounts during an investigation. I know, Maggie said quietly. She's trying to choke my access to forced dependency again. A perfect reversal. Tyler set down the mugs. We will call Dana first thing tomorrow. She will handle it. But Maggie's mind was already somewhere else, back in her years behind a government desk, watching complaint forms slide across her counter, each one capable of destroying a reputation faster than a trial ever could. She knew how these things worked, and she knew Heather was buying time. That night, Maggie could not sleep. The guest room was quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She sat upright, laptop open, scrolling through her file's trust documents, property deeds, every ledger entry she had ever written. The years seemed to unfold in front of her like a long, slow revelation. Every sacrifice neatly categorized. Every kindness turned against her. At midnight, she began typing a new document. Personal statement. Voluntary submission to Adult Protective Services investigation. In clear, deliberate sentences, she wrote everything. My name is Margaret Lawson. I am 75 years old. I have been accused of exploiting my own son and daughter-in-law. I submit this statement voluntarily, with evidence attached, to demonstrate that the opposite is true. She listed the financial transfers, each annotated with purpose and bank receipt. She attached photographs of handwritten notes, receipts, even birthday cards where Kyle had thanked her for help with the down payment. Her closing line read, "This complaint will not destroy me. It will define the moment I stopped allowing others to define me." By the time she pressed save, the first hint of dawn lightened the horizon. At 8:30 in the morning, Maggie and Tyler walked into the Adult Protective Services regional office, a square, sterile building with fluorescent lights that buzzed faintly like nervous insects. The intake clerk looked up, surprised. "Mrs. Lawson?" "Yes," Maggie said. "I believe you are expecting me." Within minutes, they were seated across from a case officer, a woman named Detective Alvarez, the same voice from the night before. She offered her hand. "Thank you for coming in voluntarily, ma'am. Most people do not." Maggie smiled faintly. "Most people have something to hide. I do not." Alvarez nodded. "The report we received alleges that you misappropriated joint funds belonging to your son and his wife. It also mentions coercion, emotional manipulation." Tyler scoffed, but Maggie lifted a hand to silence him. "May I speak?" "Of course," Alvarez said. Maggie opened her folder, the same old leather ledger she had carried since her City Hall days, and began sliding documents across the table, one after another. "Here," she said, "is the purchase agreement for the Lawson residence. The down payment came from my savings. Here are bank transfers marked as gifts, pre-tax and declared. Here is a record of every deposit made into their account, each followed by a thank you message from my son." Alvarez studied the papers, her expression tightening. "You are very thorough." "It was my job," Maggie replied, "and my mistake was assuming that love would be as permanent as documentation." For a long moment, the detective said nothing. Then she closed the file slowly. "Mrs. Lawson," she said, "between you and me, it is rare to see this level of detail. I suspect this case will not last long." Maggie exhaled, calm but unsmiling. "Good, because I am not just defending my money, I am defending my name." Outside the building, Tyler grinned. "You crushed that. Heather is not going to see this coming." But Maggie did not smile. "She is not done yet," she said quietly. "She will pivot. When manipulation fails, people like her use sympathy." As they crossed the parking lot, her phone buzzed again, a new voicemail notification. She hesitated, then pressed play. Heather's voice poured through the speaker, trembling, tearful, weaponized. "Kyle left me. He is blaming me for everything. Please, Margaret, I know I have said terrible things, but I need help. I have nowhere to go. Please." Tyler's expression hardened. "She is lying." "Of course she is," Maggie said softly. "But lies do not lose power just because we recognize them. They lose power when we stop reacting to them." She deleted the message. Then she looked up at the morning sky, clear, wide, infinite. "I think it is time," she said. "Time for what?" Tyler asked. "For closure," she answered, "but not the kind they are expecting." That evening, Maggie sat by the window of her new home, the one her late brother had built for her decades ago. The garden outside glowed gold in the fading Sunday. For the first time in years, peace did not feel like silence. It felt like ownership. She poured herself tea, opened her ledger one last time, and wrote her final entry. October 7th, the truth is documented. The debt is emotional, not financial. I forgive them, but I will never return. She closed the book, placed it gently beside her and smiled. Then, in the reflection of the glass, something moved a shadow at the end of the driveway, familiar, hesitant. A man, standing still, holding a soaked envelope in his hand. Kyle. As he stepped closer, the porch light caught his face, eyes red, voice trembling. "Mom," he said, "you need to hear what Heather just did." The rain fell in thin, slanting lines, whispering against the wooden deck. Kyle stood there, soaked to the bone, clutching a wrinkled envelope as though it were a weapon or a confession. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Maggie rose from her chair and opened the door. "You should come inside before you drown." He hesitated, eyes lowered like a boy caught stealing. "Can I?" "Only if you plan to tell me the truth," she said quietly. He stepped in, dripping water across the floor. The warmth of the house hit him like a wave calm, ordered, everything his own home had ceased to be. Tyler appeared from the hallway, alert. "You all right, Kyle?" Kyle nodded weakly. I think I made a mistake. A big one." Tyler folded his arms. "You are going to have to be more specific than that." Kyle handed Maggie the envelope. Heather filed something, not just the Adult Protective Services report. She went to the bank. She withdrew everything. Maggie frowned. "Everything?" "She moved all the money from our joint account into a new one under her name only. And then she filed a domestic claim saying I was complicit in your abuse. She is trying to make me the scapegoat, too." Maggie's expression didn't change, but her chest tightened. "How much?" Kyle's voice cracked. "All of it. Nearly $80,000. Tyler muttered under his breath. "Unbelievable." Kyle slumped into a chair. "I thought she was just angry, that she would calm down. But when I got home, she was gone. So were her clothes. She left a note saying she was going to finish what she started." Maggie leaned forward slowly. "Do you know where she went?" He shook his head. "No, but I think she is talking to someone, maybe the press. She said something about telling the world her side." For the first time, Maggie felt something colder than anger, that quiet dread that comes when you realize the person attacking you isn't doing it for victory anymore. They are doing it for destruction. "She will not stop until I am ruined," she said softly. Tyler looked between them. "Then we make sure she ruins herself first." By the next morning, Dana Hayes had already filed an emergency injunction to freeze the missing funds and alert law enforcement. "She cannot legally move joint assets without consent," Dana explained over the speakerphone. "And since you have all the records, she has nowhere to hide." Kyle's voice trembled. "I do not care about the money anymore. I just want this to end." Maggie looked at him, this grown man who once cried over broken toys, who once promised he would take care of her when she got old. Now he looked like that boy again, only smaller. "This is not about money," she said. "It never was." "What do you mean?" he asked. "She does not want my house or my savings," Maggie said. "She wants my voice. She wants me silent. Because silence is power for her, not for me." That afternoon, Maggie sat alone in the garden. The autumn air was crisp. The trees were shedding, as if the earth itself were learning to let go. She held her ledger in her lap, the same book that had once been a habit, then a defense, and now a weapon. She turned to the final page and began to write. October 9th, Heather Lawson has fled. She has stolen what is tangible, but cannot touch what is permanent. The truth remains mine. Then, beneath it, she added one more line, the one she had never written before. Forgiveness is not returning. It is refusing to follow. As she closed the ledger, she heard footsteps behind her. Kyle sat beside her quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, he whispered, "I do not deserve forgiveness." Maggie looked at him, older, broken, repentant, and her voice was soft but firm. "Forgiveness is not something you deserve, Kyle. It is something I choose, but reconciliation, that is earned." He nodded, eyes wet. "I understand." She reached out, touched his hand. "You are still my son, but you will have to rebuild what you broke, not through words but through time." Days passed. The case against her was dismissed after evidence showed clear financial abuse, but not by Margaret. Heather Lawson's name appeared in the reports now, tied to forged signatures, false testimony, and the attempted manipulation of an elderly woman for financial gain. By late October, law enforcement located her across state lines. She had spent nearly all the stolen money on a lawyer and a public relations consultant who promised to rewrite her narrative. It failed. When Maggie received the final notice, case closed. No wrongdoing found, she didn't smile. She simply folded it into her ledger and tucked it away. Peace was not triumphant. It was quiet. That evening, as twilight fell across the garden, Maggie brewed tea and sat by the window once more. The air smelled of wet leaves and cedar. She could see the faint reflection of her face in the glass, older now, yes, but whole. Tyler appeared at the doorway. "You know," he said, "most people would have wanted revenge." Maggie smiled faintly. "Revenge is loud, peace is permanent." She looked toward the horizon. "And I have wasted enough of my life living for other people's approval. Now I live for proof, and proof lasts longer than love." Tyler nodded. "What will you do next?" She thought for a moment, then whispered, "Something I have not done in decades, start over." Weeks later, a letter arrived addressed simply to Mrs. M. Lawson. It was written in Heather's handwriting, postmarked from a women's correctional facility. Maggie didn't open it right away. She stared at it for a long while, then finally placed it inside her ledger unread. Some truths, she decided, don't need to be spoken to be known. Outside, the wind rustled through the fading trees. And for the first time in 75 years, Margaret Lawson felt not old, not forgotten, but free. In the end, the story was never about wealth, or betrayal, or revenge. It was about a woman who spent her entire life recording the world for others until the day she finally wrote the truth for herself. Because sometimes, the greatest act of resistance is simply refusing to disappear.